Have you ever heard a belief repeated so often that it just becomes fact? Something everyone, from top experts to the person on the street, just accepts as true. Well, in the United States after the Civil War, there was one such belief that felt absolutely unbreakable. It was a core assumption, a foundational truth for the U.S. Army. Native Plains tribes could never, ever defeat disciplined American soldiers in a straight-up fight. Think about the context for a moment. The year is 1865. The nation is just emerging from the smoke and chaos of the Civil War, the largest, most brutal industrial war the world had ever seen. The Union Army, now the United States Army, had survived this crucible. It had faced massive, well-organized Confederate armies, endured staggering casualties, and ultimately, it had won. This victory forged a new identity for the Army, one built on a powerful sense of permanence and overwhelming superiority. They had stared down the barrel of modern warfare and come out on top. So, when senior officers looked west, towards the Great Plains, what did they see? In their eyes, the warriors of tribes like the Lakota, Cheyenne, and the Arapaho were, frankly, not a serious military threat. These officers, men who had planned campaigns involving tens of thousands of soldiers, railroads, and telegraphs, looked at lightly armed warriors on horseback and saw a primitive force, incapable of challenging their trained, professional infantry. Their experience against the Confederates seemed to prove it. If massive, entrenched armies couldn't stop them, how could scattered bands of warriors possibly stand a chance? This wasn't just a view held in the high command back in Washington. Out on the frontier, the commanders on the ground felt the exact same way. They developed a narrative that native resistance wasn't based on strategy or tactical brilliance. No, they believed it was all about fear, surprise, and hit-and-run tactics. They thought that if you could just corner them, force them into a direct confrontation, their courage would evaporate. The idea that these tribes could coordinate complex military operations or execute a sophisticated battle plan was simply dismissed out of hand. This thinking was baked into military doctrine, the very rulebook for how the army operated. The strategy was simple and, they believed, foolproof. Build forts, march in disciplined columns, and use the latest technology like repeating rifles. These three things, they taught, guaranteed control of any contested territory. The forts were anchors of power. The marching columns projected that power across the landscape, and the repeating rifles provided the firepower to crush any opposition. It was a formula, a mathematical certainty. And this belief wasn't just confined to the military. It echoed throughout American society. Newspapers in the East ran stories that reinforced this idea, painting a picture of an unstoppable army, bringing order to a wild frontier. Politicians in Congress gave speeches justifying westward expansion, framing it as an inevitable and righteous process. They minimized the potential costs, both in money and in lives, by assuring the public that any resistance would be easily swept aside. The narrative was consistent, powerful, and repeated everywhere. When faced with the organized force of the United States Army, the Plains tribes would simply scatter like dust in the wind. Why was this belief so powerful, so unbreakable? Well, it was incredibly convenient. It served a vital purpose. It justified the policy of westward expansion, manifest destiny, which was seen as the nation's God-given right. If the original inhabitants of the land were not a significant military obstacle, then taking that land became a much easier proposition to sell to the American people. It framed the whole endeavor not as a difficult, bloody conquest, but as a simple, low-cost policing action. It made the immense project of settling the West seem manageable and morally straightforward. For the soldiers and officers themselves, it was a source of immense confidence, perhaps even overconfidence. They were the victors of the Civil War. They were the representatives of a modern, industrial nation. In their minds, they were the very definition of military might. The idea that they could be beaten in an open battle by warriors they considered disorganized and ill-equipped was not just unlikely. It was unthinkable. It went against everything they knew, everything they had experienced, and everything they had been told. The belief was a shield, protecting them from doubt and fear as they pushed deeper into territories that had been home to others for centuries. So, the stage was set. An army convinced of its own invincibility, a government pushing for relentless expansion, and a public primed to believe in an easy victory. The belief was more than just an opinion. It was an entire worldview, a lens through which the West was seen. It felt as solid as the Rocky Mountains themselves. But history has a funny way of shattering even the most unbreakable beliefs with a single, shocking moment. And in the cold winter of 1866, on a remote trail in what is now Wyoming, one such moment was about to arrive, a moment that would challenge every assumption, shake the army to its core, and prove that the story they had been telling themselves was a dangerous illusion. That moment, known as the Fetterman Fight, would shatter that belief forever. And it would change the course of the American West. You've arrived in the Powder River country. The land feels endless, doesn't it? Wide, empty plains that stretch to the horizon. But don't let the stillness fool you. Danger hides behind every ridge, in every shadow-filled draw. This isn't just empty space, it's a sacred hunting ground. For the Lakota, the Cheyenne, and the Arapaho, this land is life itself. And they don't take kindly to intruders. Here, you meet a man named Red Cloud. He's an Oglala Lakota leader, maybe in his 40s. You can tell right away his authority isn't from a title or a uniform. It's earned. It's in the way he carries himself, the quiet patience in his eyes. This is a man whose judgment has been proven time and again in war. He's not impulsive, he's deliberate. He studies his enemy with the same intensity. He studies the land, understanding every strength, every weakness, and that's what sets him apart. He refuses to fight on the army's terms, you see. A new scar has been cut across this sacred ground. They call it the Bozeman Trail. It's a shortcut for miners and settlers rushing to the gold fields of Montana, and it slices right through the heart of Lakota territory. To protect this new highway, the U.S. government has built a string of forts. 3 of them, including the formidable Fort Phil Kearny, stand like iron fists in the middle of this hostile land, guarding the constant flow of wagon trains. Inside those forts, you see the soldiers. Many of the officers are bored, restless. They've been stationed out here for months, and the initial fear has faded into a dangerous overconfidence. They look out at the hills and see nothing but empty wilderness. They dismiss the warriors. They know we're watching them, day in and day out. They see them as disorganized, a nuisance to be swatted away, not a strategic force to be reckoned with. They're itching for a decisive fight, a chance to prove their superiority and end this conflict once and for all. But you understand what the officers don't. This isn't just a series of small skirmishes. This is a fight for the future. Control of the Bozeman Trail will decide whether the northern plains remain native land or become just another conquered territory. The stakes couldn't be higher. As autumn gives way to a harsh winter, the pressure builds, the air grows cold, and the tension becomes so thick you can almost taste it. The patrols from Fort Phil Kearny become routine, predictable. The soldiers ride out, follow the same paths, and return, growing more complacent with each passing day. They're following their training, their rule books, completely unaware that they are playing a part in a much larger strategy, one not written in any army manual. From the hills, Red Cloud watches. He sees the patterns. He sees the arrogance. He understands the army's mindset, their belief that they are invincible, that their technology and discipline make them unbreakable. And in this, he sees his opportunity. He's not just planning a raid. He's orchestrating a masterpiece of psychological warfare. His goal isn't just to win a battle. but to shatter the enemy's confidence, to break their spirit. He begins to unite the disparate bands of Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho. This is no easy task. These are proud, independent groups, not a unified army. But Red Cloud's reputation, his quiet strength, and his clear vision persuade them. He speaks not of reckless charges but of patience, of luring the enemy into a trap of their own making. He convinces them to work together, to set aside their differences for a common cause, to drive the invaders from their land for good. You feel the moment approaching. The snow is deep now, the landscape unforgiving. The soldiers at Fort Phil Kearny are growing weary of the cold. But their commanders are still spoiling for a fight. They crave a victory to report back east. They send out patrols with increasing frequency, hoping to provoke an engagement. They don't realize they aren't the predators, they are the bait. And this is where you find yourself. Standing at the precipice of history. You're watching Red Cloud, a brilliant strategist, face an impossible challenge. How to defeat an army that believes it cannot be broken. He plans to use their own arrogance, their own rules, against them. He's about to teach the United States Army a lesson they will never forget, right here, in the heart of the Powder River country. The trap is being set. The actors are all in place. All that's left is for the final scene to play out. What happens next will change the course of the American West forever. This is the story of Red Cloud's war, a conflict defined not by overwhelming force, but by brilliant strategy and an unyielding will to protect a way of life. It's a stark reminder that in warfare, understanding your enemy and the land you fight on is the most powerful weapon of all. The soldiers in the fort believe they hold all the cards. But out here in the biting wind, a different kind of power is gathering, ready to be unleashed. The quiet before the storm is about to end. It's the morning of December 21st, 1866. I'm standing outside the walls of Fort Phil Kearny, in what will one day be northern Wyoming. The cold is a physical presence, a brutal, biting force that settles deep in your bones. The ground is frozen solid, dusted with a layer of hardened snow that crunches under every step. The air is so frigid it feels like breathing tiny shards of glass. Even in this cold, life at the fort must go on. Timber is just as vital as ammunition for survival out here. And I watch as a woodcutting party heads out, a small guard detail escorting them. Life on the frontier is a constant exercise in risk management. Suddenly, movement catches my eye. On the ridges overlooking the fort, a group of warriors appears. They aren't trying to hide. They're Lakota and Cheyenne. And they're making themselves just visible enough to be seen, to be a provocation. To an untrained eye, it might look like a random, opportunistic raid. But I can see the design in it. This isn't a raid, it's a lure. This is a carefully laid trap. And the fort is the target of the deception. Inside the fort, the alarm is raised. There's a flurry of activity as a relief force is hastily assembled. Captain William J. Fetterman, an officer known for his bravado and a deep disdain for his adversaries, eagerly volunteers to lead the charge. He's given command of a mixed detachment of infantry and cavalry, 80 men in total, plus himself. 81 souls tasked with driving off the decoys. As the men prepare, I can hear the casual, confident boasts of the officers. One of them laughs and claims they could ride through the entire Sioux Nation with just this company. The arrogance is thick in the frosty air, a dangerous and blinding fog. They see a small band of warriors, an easy victory, a chance for glory. They don't see the truth. The fort's commander, Colonel Henry Carrington, gives Fetterman a very specific, very strict order. Under no circumstances must you cross Lodge Trail Ridge. He's to relieve the wood train and drive off the attackers, but not pursue them beyond the ridge, where they would lose sight of the fort and be beyond the range of its supporting artillery. Fetterman acknowledges the order, and his column rides out. The heavy gates of the fort swing shut behind them, the sound echoing with a grim finality. I watch as Fetterman leads his men out. At first, They move towards the besieged wood train. But the small group of warriors on the ridge continues their taunts, their deliberate display. There a red flag waved in front of a ball, and Fetterman, full of confidence and ambition, cannot resist. He makes a fateful decision. He turns his column away from the wood train and heads directly for the decoys, straight towards Lodge Trail Ridge. He's now actively disobeying a direct order. A knot of tension tightens in my stomach. Every step his soldiers take increases the distance from the safety of the fort, stretching their lifeline thinner and thinner. The decoy party is masterful in its execution. It includes some of the most respected warriors, among them a young Oglala Lakota named Crazy Horse. They never let the soldiers get too close, but they never pull too far ahead either. They retreat with a calculated slowness, drawing the column forward, pulling them deeper into the trap. I can see Crazy Horse, not acting out of fear, but with a chilling, tactical precision. He dismounts, pretends his horse is tired, and fusses with its bridle, luring the soldiers into a reckless charge, confident they can catch him. They are being led by the nose, and they are completely oblivious. The soldiers, eager for a fight, push their horses hard. They thunder up the slope of Lodge Trail Ridge, their focus entirely on the handful of warriors ahead. As the column finally crests the ridge, they disappear from the view of the fort. In that instant, everything changes. The terrain on the other side is a maze of gullies and blind spots. Sight lines are gone, and sound becomes a confusing, muffled chaos. The trap is sprung. The moment they are over the ridge, the world explodes. From the tall grass and hidden ravines on three sides, gunfire erupts. What the soldiers thought was a small raiding party is suddenly a massive force of Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho warriors, perhaps as many as 2,000. They rise from the earth like ghosts, a wave of fury and steel that was completely concealed just seconds before. The soldiers are caught in a perfect crossfire, a kill box. Panic spreads through the American ranks instantly. Cohesion shatters. The confident boasts from just an hour ago, replaced by screams of shock and terror. Soldiers try to form skirmish lines, but it's hopeless. The volleys are too heavy, coming from too many directions. The sheer number of warriors is overwhelming. In the bitter cold, black powder rifles begin to misfire. Commands are shouted, but are lost in the deafening roar of battle. It's not a fight, it's a slaughter. The cavalry, who were at the front of the column, are swarmed first. Horses, struck by arrows and bullets, scream and fall, trapping their riders beneath them. The infantry, further back, are quickly overwhelmed. The warriors close the distance with terrifying speed and precision, their movements fluid and deadly. They move through the beleaguered soldiers, a relentless tide that cannot be stopped. The entire engagement is over in less than 20 minutes. From the first shot to the last, the destruction is swift and total. I watch as the last small pockets of resistance are snuffed out. The gunfire sputters and then fades into an eerie silence, broken only by the wind whistling across the frozen hills. The battle is over. I stand there, looking out over the ridge where the column disappeared. All 81 men who rode out under Captain Fetterman's command are dead. Not a single soldier survived to tell the story of what happened on the other side of Lodge Trail Ridge. The decoy worked perfectly. The arrogance of the pursuers led them to their doom. It would be known as the Fetterman fight to the U.S. Army, but to the Lakota and their allies, it was the Battle of the 100 in the hand, a decisive and devastating victory. And for a brief time, it stopped the army in its tracks, a stark and bloody reminder of the cost of underestimating your enemy. The shockwave from that single, devastating hour on the ridge spread far beyond the snow-covered hills of Wyoming. Back east, in the halls of military command and in the parlors of American homes, the news was met with disbelief, then a chilling realization. This wasn't just a skirmish, this was a statement. For the first time, officers who had dismissed the Plains warriors as a disorganized, undisciplined force had to confront a terrifying new reality. The tribes could and would coordinate complex, large-scale military operations with deadly precision. The carefully laid trap, the flawless execution, it shattered the Army's long-held confidence. The illusion of inevitable victory, the very foundation of their expansionist policy, had cracked. The Fetterman fight wasn't an isolated incident. It was the brutal centerpiece of what would become known as Red Cloud's War. And the strategic fallout was immediate and profound. The Bozeman Trail, that artery of westward expansion, carved straight through Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho hunting grounds, suddenly seemed less like a highway to progress and more like a death trap. The flow of migrants and supplies dwindled. The forts built to protect it, like Fort Phil Kearny, became islands of anxiety in a sea of hostility. Within 2 years, the United States government did something it had never done before and would never do again. It gave up. The Army abandoned the Bozeman Trail entirely. Fort Phil Kearny, Fort C.F. Smith, and Fort Reno were burned to the ground by the victorious warriors, the smoke signaling an undeniable truth across the plains. Red Cloud's War remains the only major conflict in American history where the United States government fully conceded to Native demands, signing the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868, which granted the Lakota control over the Black Hills and the Powder River country. This defeat forced a painful and necessary evolution in military doctrine. The reckless, arrogant charges into the unknown were replaced by a new emphasis on caution, on fortification, and on the use of overwhelming force. The Army learned a lesson written in blood. Underestimating your opponent is a fatal mistake. Future campaigns would be characterized by larger, more heavily armed columns, extensive use of scouting, and a grim determination to never again be caught in such a vulnerable position. The ghost of Fetterman's command would haunt military strategy on the frontier for decades. But beyond the grand strategies and treaty negotiations, we must return to the human cost. We have to remember the 81 soldiers who marched out of Fort Phil Kearny that morning. Many were young men, barely in their 20s, filled with the certainty of their cause and the belief that victory was assured. They were sons, brothers, and husbands who died 1,000 miles from home, their final moments filled with a terror they could never have imagined. Their names are etched on memorials, but their stories, their individual lives, are often lost in the sheer scale of the tragedy. They were not just a number. They were men who paid the ultimate price for their nation's ambitions and their commander's hubris. And we must also remember the warriors who stood on that ridge. They weren't just fighting against soldiers. They were fighting for survival. They were protecting the land that had sustained their people for generations, the sacred grounds where their ancestors were buried, the buffalo herds that were the very source of their existence. For them, this was not a war of conquest. It was a desperate, sacred duty to defend their world from being erased. Each warrior who fought that day carried the weight of his family, his band, his nation on his shoulders. Their victory was a testament to their courage, their skill, and their profound love for their home. In the aftermath, Red Cloud snatched a sword. He had orchestrated the most successful war against the United States ever fought by a native nation. When he came to the negotiating table, he did so from a position of strength that was simply unmatched by any other Plains leader. He wasn't a defeated chief begging for scraps. He was a victorious statesman dictating terms. He had proven that resistance was not futile, that the will of his people could not be easily broken. His leadership became legendary, a symbol of powerful, unyielding defiance. This story, the story of Red Cloud's War and the Fetterman fight, matters so profoundly because it exposes the timeless danger of arrogance disguised as certainty. It's a stark reminder that underestimating others, whether in battle or in life, can lead to catastrophe. It shows us that history isn't a simple tale of winners and losers, but a complex, often tragic, tapestry woven from the perspectives of all who lived it. As we stand here now, looking back at that cold December day, a responsibility settles on us. We become the carriers of this memory, the keepers of this history. It's now our job to ensure it isn't forgotten. If this story moved you, please click the like button. Your support helps us keep this kind of history alive and ensures these voices from the past can still be heard today. We are committed to rescuing these forgotten stories from the archives, one by one. We invite you to subscribe and join our community of history lovers. In the comments below, please tell us where you're watching from, and if you or someone in your family has served in the military. We'd be honored if you'd share that with us. Thank you for taking the time to remember. Thank you for ensuring that Red Cloud, the warriors who fought beside him, and the 81 men of Fetterman's detachment are not lost to time. Because history only survives when we choose to remember it.